You ready, Jess?
We are rolling, yes.
Okay. This is JJ Pianchi at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign interviewing Jerry DeWitt on August 3rd, 2017 at the University Library in Urbana, Illinois. Where and when were you born?
Blue Island, Illinois, 1949.
Who are or were your parents, and what are or were their occupations?
Mother was Lois Marie DeWitt. She was a homemaker. Edgar William DeWitt was my father. He was a carpenter.
Do you have any siblings?
Yes. I have two brothers. Do you want them?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Two brothers, both living. My older brother, Ed, is a retired millwright from General Motors, and my younger brother, Larry, is a retired pipe fitter. And my sister, Jackie, is working part-time as a nurse, and she's in Florida. My other sister is deceased.
Did any of them serve in the military?
My brother did. He was in the United States Navy.
Which one? Which brother?
The older brother, sorry.
Okay. What were you doing before you entered the service?
High school.
Okay, high school. What branch of the military did you serve in?
United States Army.
Did you enlist or were you drafted?
I enlisted.
Okay. Why did you choose that branch of the service?
Everybody else was in our family was going to the Navy or the Air Force, and I wanted to break the mold.
You didn't want to be like the other kids?
That's right.
Okay. What happened when you departed for training camp and during your early days of training?
When you say what happened, what do you mean?
Well, what was it like?
Well, for one thing, they seemed to make sure that you got to basic training in the middle of the night, so you were totally disoriented. We flew from Chicago to St. Louis, and then they threw us on buses. And this was before the interstate system was as good as it is now. And got to Fort Leonard Wood, I think it was about 1:30 in the morning. And started to question if I had really thought this decision out at that time. The first thing they did was march us through, give us orientation, start issuing us uniforms, and shave our heads bald.
So a little shocking.
That's the way it's supposed to be, because they're trying to break everything. They do want you to suddenly get out of that mode of thinking into their mode of thinking.
And what year is this?
1967.
Do you recall your instructors, and if so, what were they like?
Oh, bloody hell, yes. Sergeant McLeod was my platoon sergeant, and Sergeant Crocker was our company sergeant. And, oh my goodness. I can still remember some of the things that we had to go through with them, and sort of like too numerous to mention.
Can you give an example?
Sure. You ever hear of a dying cockroach?
Yes.
No, I mean the position of a dying cockroach.
On your back with all your legs in the air?
Arms and legs in the air, screaming on the top of your lung, I'm a dying cockroach because you screwed up.
Okay then.
I can also remember good old Sergeant Crocker's voice when we were going through firearms training at that time was called train fire.
Okay.
God knows why. But you have about 200 people all lined up. 2/3 of that number is unloading their M14s, 20 rounds, rapid fire. Mm-hmm. One guy is in the back calling out the targets so that you could learn how to do that stuff right away. And they cleared the line, told everybody to open fire, and because I was back, I could kind of hear something in the back from the tower. And as fire started to die down, I can remember Sergeant Crocker screaming, "Cease fire, cease fire, cease fire, lock and clear all weapons, and I mean right now, goddammit." Two guys apparently broke out of a Missouri State prison and came over the hill just as we opened fire. We've missed them.
Lucky.
175 people firing, and nobody gets a hit?
Well, you were still new at training.
I guess.
Was that kind of were accidents common? I mean, did accidents
Oh yeah,
happen?
we had one guy fell off the slide for life, you know, you climb up the tower and grab onto the rope and slide down, and he missed the rope. Yeah. From what I understand, he had a fractured shoulder. Not sure. I don't know if he even stayed in the Army, because basically he was in the hospital and he was out because you knew, well, he's out of basic training for at least a year, so what are they going to do?
Right. Gotcha.
So we had some people in the obstacle course fall off some of the obstacles that got tangled in them and stuff like this. Nobody was killed that I recall, but there was some serious, I mean, you're training people how to kill people. There's going to be accidents.
Right. Okay.
So,
Did you receive any specialized training, and if so, in what?
well, there was two things. I belonged to the Army Security Agency, a unit which no longer exists. As I tell people, my MOS, the Military Occupational Specialty, no longer exists. The unit I was in no longer exists, and the country I fought in no longer exists. So, we were a communications unit and communications security, and I had specialized training before I went to Vietnam that was specific to that area. As far as anything really specific on what I did, even though you could probably read about it in any one of several books, I personally have not been released to talk about that stuff, so I don't.
Okay. Can you talk about sort of in general, like what you did? Like, did you just secure?
Well, there was a reason. Please understand, I was not combat arms when I was in the military.
Okay.
Even though the United States military is a wonderful organization, I don't care what service you're in, there was one rifle for everybody, at least at that time. So your primary MOS was, you do know what MOS means, don't you? It's Military Occupational Specialty.
Okay.
Your primary MOS was rifleman, because if nobody else is around, you were it. Anyhow, what was I lost track of the question.
Can you just give a general idea of what you did?
Yeah, basically I worked in a communications outfit, and the reason I was not slogging in the mud is because one of my radio receiving units weighed about 70 pounds, and I had two of them, plus all the things that you had to run in a power itself. I was always in a truck, a van, a couple times in a track, but that was about it. A track is an armored personnel carrier. Sorry, I'm slipping into some of the jargon, and I don't mean to.
No, it's okay. That's totally fine.
Okay.
How did you adapt to military life, including physical regimen, barracks, food, and social life?
Sorry. Well, remember when I told you they got you there at like 1 in the morning so you could start getting disoriented right away? Eventually you just know what it is. You know when you listen to a certain whistle, a bugle call, you listen, even though those loudspeakers you could never understand their voice, you knew who was talking and probably what they were saying. As far as the physical facilities, well, you know, I've lived out under the sky, I've lived under canvas, lived in brick buildings, and lived in Quonset huts, and it really didn't seem to make a whole lot of difference. Everything was pretty much the same. The uniforms? You know, when I was younger, I used to worry about stuff like this. Now I say, hey, it's kind of nice. The food, I don't know that I had anything I would describe as really bad, but there were some that was a whole lot better than others.
Just in terms of regular chow, or in
Well,
terms
look at it
of
this
like
way.
chow versus
I was in the
MRE?
military with people who, they really literally came in with nothing. I mean, the military was probably the first day they wore shoes 7 days a week. And if they stayed in the military, it was a matter of, 3 hots and a cot, 3 hot meals and a place to sleep. And they even give you some money. So, does that sound cynical? I'm not sure.
How about social life?
Well, there was always drinking, and that's always one thing that I could never quite understand. As I thought about it years on, I would say they actively encouraged alcohol consumption. I know we had some people who were career people who the reason they were in the military was because of cheap booze. And let's face it, when you get a whole bunch of guys, most of them under the age of 22, and you start giving them free access to liquor, you're looking for trouble. And there's going to happen. And it did happen.
So was trouble pretty common?
It happened every now and then. People get bored and they just get fed up and somebody says the wrong thing and that's how it starts. You know, and about stupid things. One time we were in they called them the Open Mess. Basically it was a club. Mm-hmm. In this case it was in Vietnam. It was like a big warehouse that they served beer at. And we were there. There was a unit from the 1st Cavalry that was there, and there was a unit from the 173rd Airborne that were there. And everybody's getting liquored up, and they're groups. I mean, it's not like that. And next thing, some idiots from the CAF start pounding on the table that, you know, 1st Cav's the only Cav, 1st Cav's the only Cav. And somebody from the Airborne outfit said, "You bastards ran in Korea, you'll run again." The conversation went downhill after that. The MPs had to break it up with tear gas.
Oh my.
Happy days, happy days. And that's not even talking about some things that were going on. Remember, this is a period of time when there was a lot of unrest in this country, and that carried into the military. And there were racial and cultural groups, I guess you'd say, and you were best to stay out of their areas.
Mm-hmm. So was there like hazing type of stuff going on as well, like especially towards certain types of groups of people? Or more of a classism type of thing? It was a classism type of thing in the fact that everybody would establish their own hierarchy. I mean, you had the usual that you had the normal. If you were a buck private, you know you're at the bottom of the pile. On up. But, for example, a lot of the Hispanic troops would hang around together. Best not to bother them or try to be their buddy or anything. They would let you know if they want to talk to you. Same thing with African American troops. Same thing with some guys from the South. I mean, hell, we had Klansmen in the military. I know that. You know, and you're trying to fight a war? It's a lot. Yeah. All right. Where were you stationed? From October 1968 to June of 1970, I was in Vietnam. And after I left Vietnam, I was in Taiwan until, let's see, got there in June of 70. And I got out, would have been late September 71. And it was one of these instances where I came back, I had less than 6 months left on my enlistment. Mm-hmm. And what they would do is they would just discharge you on the spot. So I got to Fort Lewis, Washington. 8 hours later, I was on a plane heading home. You know, that's it. Okay, so you didn't have to do, what do you call it, reserve? Oh, I was in the inactive reserve. Mm-hmm. But that was just at that time. You have to remember, the draft was still active back then. Mm-hmm. So they kept people coming through. I think the draft ended, 1973? Something like that. So, you know, they had people coming through, and basically, if you had less than 6 months on enlistment and it didn't look like you were going to re-enlist, they just discharged. It was cheaper that way. Mm-hmm. So. Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Anywhere in particular in Vietnam? 3 and 4 Corps area, which is basically you take a line north of Saigon, maybe about 100 miles, draw it straight across, and go down. Mm-hmm. We had, our base camp was at Ben Hoa, which is a huge air base. I think that place could put some small cities to shame with how big it was. But, and then you go out from there. I mean,
There was one area that was down in the Delta, and it was a special military district, and I think they called it that because I don't think there was 5 square yards of dry land in that whole place. That's where, who was that congressman from Iowa that went, that was the Secretary of Defense? Not Schumer. I can't remember his name now, but he was Secretary of Defense for a little while under Obama. He was there as a grunt in the 9th Infantry Division, so I felt comfortable when they named him as Secretary for Defense, because this is a guy who's humped that rucksack around. He knows what it is to jump off a chopper and sink up to your hips in mud, so, and still have to move.
So when you were in Vietnam, you didn't have to do that kind of jumping off of a chopper and...
Like I said, with everything I had to do my job. The expression that they used for people like me was REMF, was rear echelon motherfucker.
Okay.
But, and there's some truth to that. However, when we had been infiltrated, I can remember them lining us all up and giving us the command to fix bayonets. Because between the berm, which was like your outer defense line, and the next line of defense, there was probably a field of maybe anywhere from 50 to 100 yards. Supposedly defoliated, but still there. And basically you had to go and flush them out that way. That's another time when I was really thinking that I did not think this out.
So what were some other memories of your experience either in Vietnam or Taiwan before you came back to the United States?
Well, I can remember one incident in Vietnam. Can I borrow your cup a minute? This is this is a demonstration thing. We were standing down, and we had an open area that we showed movies in. And as I said, you get a whole bunch of young kids that are liquored up. And sure as hell, that place was a real pigsty in the morning. So the first sergeant, being the neatnik that he was, everybody up, police the area. Now, as I was walking down the line, because that's how you did it, there was a cup like that. And it was one of those tall wax cups at that time. And being a jackass that I was, I might have kicked the thing or done this, picked it up like this. But I didn't. For some reason, I went like this and picked it up. And there was a hand grenade in there without the pin. They had snuck in and booby-trapped that thing. Yeah, that was sort of a, the only thing I can say is somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Don't be a jerk." So they had to get EOD, and they took it from me, and I was definitely in a, permission to fudge my shorts, make it so. Because I don't know how good the fusing mechanism was on that sucker.
Wow. Did that kind of like booby trapping happen often?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You'd get in there and that's why, our current president building a wall, it's sort of like, and they say, well, it works in Israel. No, it doesn't. They're still sneaking in.
So even though you weren't on the front lines, you did see some level of action. What kind of combat action did you witness?
Well, in 1969, they had what they called the mini tent, which was probably their last gasp. And we had just stood down for a while. We figured we were, we could relax for a little bit. Day and a half later, they used rockets and mortars on the base. And rockets were kind of interesting because they didn't have a lot of times the launching mechanism was a couple poles they put like this, and they got it up there and they fired it and they sort of aimed it in your direction.
So we're not talking precision here.
No, it's what we call an area weapon. You just fire a whole shitload of them and one of them's bound to hit. Mortars are something different though. They're pretty accurate, and they're aiming for you. But they, I can remember, where the Army part of the base was kind of on a hill, and you could look down and see the airfield. And even though it was kind of a parallax view, boy, the zoomies took it tough that night. And the next day, they were so close to us that when the planes would take off from the airbase, they wouldn't get their wheels up before they were dumping their ordnance. You know, we had shell casings falling on us. It's the way it goes. Yeah. Wouldn't want to do it again.
Okay. If you so having seen combat, how did you feel when witnessing casualties and destruction?
You try to file it away. But the one thing I could never get out of my sensory system was the smell. Just, you know. When this attack finished, we had to go out and clear some bodies away. And one of the things that we used on our side was called fougasse. I think it's Fougasse. It's a French word, so of course we corrupted the snot out of it. But what this was a 55-gallon drum that was full of a compound that very similar to napalm, and underneath it you had a command detonated mine, so when you fired it, it went out like this. Amazing thing what happens to the body when it's been burned like something like that. Just have to kind of get out there with the hooks and pull them off the wire. You know. At 19, I saw things a little bit differently. At 19, it was serve the bastards right. Now it's kind of like, what in the hell was it all for? So, next question.
What kinds of friendships and camaraderie did you form while serving, and with whom?
There's a couple guys I keep in touch with occasionally. You know, it's not necessarily that everybody was a whole bunch of buddies and stuff like that, because that's not going to happen. But it's with the people who had your back, and I had theirs. So, I mean, we're older now. Geez, Willie passed away. You know, and not sure what happened to Rusty. I haven't heard from him sometime. And Enos, last time I heard, he had moved to Britain. So it happens. People move on.
How have you generally stayed in touch with them?
Christmas cards, stuff
Christmas
like that.
cards.
Yeah, that kind of stuff.
How did you stay in touch with family and friends back home?
At that time, it was letters. As a matter of fact, that's how I got a little interview with the CO. Because I didn't write home, so my mom contacted the Red Cross, who contacted my CO, who made sure that that day I wrote a letter at home. So.
I bet Mom had some words for you.
If I don't go to purgatory for what I did to my parents, you guys are all safe. That's all I will say.
So after that, did you write home more often, or
I usually try to write home after that. Well, I tried. No, I'm trying to remember. What was going on was we had, besides the mini tent, we had the push afterwards. And it sounds terrible, but we just basically got busy. But after that, I generally wrote home like once or twice a month. Yeah. After a while, I mean, it's sort of like, well, we went out and drank cheap liquor, we're chasing loose women. You don't say that to Mom.
What were some of the things that you did say to Mom? Like,
Tell her what's going on. I'd tell her about, one time I was describing some of the company dogs that we had. Basically some things that I had seen, not the combat things, but like a temple or something. I try and send pictures. Everybody had cameras over there. As a matter of fact, they used to say that if you went overseas at that time in the military, If you went to Europe, you got a German tape recorder, a German camera, a German radio. If you went to the Pacific, you got a Japanese recorder, a Japanese camera, a Japanese radio. Because they would have it in the post exchange or the base exchange, wherever it was. And I mean, they pretty much kept the prices down a lot. I mean, I know we weren't paying market. Mind you, you had a ration card, because you could only buy so many things.
Right.
Because black market was very big.
So you could still get what you wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah. What did you do for recreation or when you were off duty?
Drink.
Anything else?
Played some football. We took several, this is when I was in Taiwan, we took several side trips. Basically learned about bow hunting. Read a lot. Somehow they had established a library on the post in Vietnam. It was just a little Quonset hut with stuff that people were stocking in, and I read a lot.
Okay.
Took some courses, some correspondence courses in the military.
So when you say taking correspondence courses, was it a boredom thing or was it I'm gonna get out and go to college?
Probably a combination of both of them. I had thought about going to college, and one time at that time they had something they called the Armed Forces Institute. I don't know if they have it. University of Maryland was running it, and through them you could take a correspondence course in English. Or I took a correspondence course in English 101. I didn't complete it because I suddenly realized I had nothing in common with anybody that I was communicating with back in the States. It was just like a completely different mindset. When I was in Vietnam, we used to say that when you went home, you went back to the world. And the difference between Vietnam and the world was like, you almost had to experience it to believe it.
So when you were in service, did you read for pleasure, and if so, what?
I read mostly for pleasure in just about everything. I read history, mysteries. I even started some of Jane Austen stuff. Now that's bored. You know? So I didn't get through it, by the way, because it's just sort of like, this woman's crazy.
Was there a genre in particular that you were more in favor
Always
of?
in history.
History?
Yeah.
Okay. What particular book would you say influenced your life the most and why?
Frank Herbert's Dune.
Okay, why Dune?
Just because of the way it laid things out. I mean, you take a look at it, you talk about there's a specific substance that everybody wants, grows in one place, which is apparently, the armpit of the universe. And the other thing was the fact that most of the things that were going on we described them as head trips. Everything that people are thinking about what they want to do. The action wasn't like a Star Wars shoot 'em up or what do they call it, a toy advertisement or something like that. It was one of those things that you had to think about. And I enjoyed the stimulation of that.
All right. Did you use libraries when you were in the service? Why
Yes.
or why not?
Yes, always. When I was at Fort Devens, which is where I took my advanced individual training, the initial course, they had a real nice post library there. I was in California just before I shipped out to Vietnam. It was a place called Two Rock Ranch. I think it's a Coast Guard base now. And it was great because very small post. People in the town was near Petaluma. And Gilroy, which if you don't know is the garlic capital of the world, which you find out about. And the people were very friendly. It was nice. I was there for 4 weeks before I shipped out. They had a little library there that was good, but the town library was actually kind of nice too.
So, especially the libraries that were on base or wherever you were at, Was that more for pleasure reading or was that more for work reading?
It was pleasure reading. They did have stuff, well, a lot of the stuff that I dealt with, the manuals had to be locked up because it was considered confidential material. So,
Yeah. Okay. Where were you when the war ended?
which time? When our troops came home or when they finally gave up Saigon?
Either, both.
When our troops started to come home, when they said peace with honor, I was in junior college and we had the Veterans Organization had sponsored a bus trip for a basketball game. And I was one of the house mouse people on the bus, the babysitter. And they made the announcement and everybody starts singing God Bless America, and the only thing I could think of was, what the hell are they singing for?
So how did you get home? How did you return home? You said you were basically flown back to...
I was flown back to Fort Lewis, Washington. 12 hours later, I was on a United Airlines flight to Chicago.
And then you just went back to Mom and Dad's house?
That was it.
That was it. Okay. How were you received by family and community?
Family, Mom breathed a sigh of relief. Dad, in his own way, was the same way. A couple close friends did come to see me. Everything else was total indifference. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you get to this point and you think, but we can address it now. There is, of course, details about veterans being called baby killers and spit on and stuff like that and have stuff thrown at them. That never happened to me personally. I have talked with people who I have no reason to doubt their sincerity, said it did happen. The hardest thing for me was the complete and utter indifference. It's almost like you came back from summer camp or a trip to Europe. And at that time, there was a lot of anger. But that was the 22-year-old Jerry, okay? The 67-year-old Jerry likes to look at things a little bit differently.
So how did 22-year-old Jerry sort of deal with that indifference? I mean, that sounds kind of
walking
overwhelming.
Around pissed off a lot.
Okay.
So we got that. Had some trouble focusing, definite trouble with some relationships, both with friends and with the opposite sex. But it was just, somehow we worked through it.
What kinds of things did you do to sort of help yourself with that readjustment? I mean, you said you were angry a lot and working through
Went
it.
to school and drank, pretty much. Yeah.
Is there, you've mentioned drinking several times. Was there something of choice? Beer or hard liquor or something else?
Beer. Loved beer. Mind you, I did develop a taste for Crown Royal, which I can no longer afford in those quantities, but I enjoy a good whiskey. I still have a bottle of Jameson's aging in the house that, as I told my wife, if Katie ever decides to have a family, I will toast the first birth of our first grandchild with the Jamesons. We'll see what happens. If I can give you an incident, and this may be jumping ahead, but this was fairly recent. Recent being within the last 8 years. I was at work, and I don't know how I got into this conversation, but one of the surgeons at Carl, is it okay to say that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He asked me, he said, Jerry, how come? He said, you were in the Army, right? And I said, yes. And he said, and you went to Vietnam? And I said, yeah. And you can record it, I don't mind.
Oh, no, my phone went.
Okay, all right. And he said, well, and he was struggling for the words. And he said, how come? And I said, are you going to ask how come and not some of these sad homeless guys you see wandering around in fatigues and, drinking and totally uncommunicative and all that kind of stuff? And he said, yeah. I said, I have to tell you this, Doc. At the peak, there were like 500,000 people in Vietnam, either there or directly supporting the operation. And that lasted over several years, not counting the time before the big buildup and the time after when they were drawing down. Most of us came home with some problems, some anger, but eventually we got over it. And that's it. So stop going to movies. Start thinking about treating people as an individual.
Is that something that you sort of encountered often as a veteran? Is that people have this idea about what you should be as a veteran?
Let's put it this
And
way.
it's
I'm a
not-
graduate of the U of Gislis.
Yeah.
Do they still call it Gislis?
They just changed it to the I school.
Whatever. But I'm a graduate of Gislis, and this is in 1990, it was still not a good idea to let everybody know what your veteran status was, and particularly where you had been. You just didn't talk about it. As a matter of fact, I would say and please understand, if I can go off topic here a little bit, I eat red meat, own guns, and read the Bible, but I tend to vote Liberal Democrat. And it's like they have trouble getting those two concepts together, that people are individuals. But, it's after a while when people would ask me about things and I would start to tell them and you could see the look in their face, and after a while I just stopped answering the questions. Remember that indifference thing I told you about? Now it's not indifference. Now it's, has this guy got a gun on him? Is this the day he decides to take everybody out? Maybe I'm reading too much into it. But that's the way it was.
Okay. Have you remained in contact with or reunited with fellow veterans, and if so, who?
Just the guys I told you about. I just thought of one thing too, unfortunately. I heard that another guy that I used to do is Dirty Joe Ryan from San Francisco. I understand he was killed in an auto accident a couple years back. It's sort of like they drop off the radar and then you lose track and you just, what happened?
Gotcha.
They do have an organization for the unit I was in the Army Security Agency, and they do have a group online, and I belong to it, even though I'm kind of like a non-participating member. The roster gets smaller every year. So, yeah.
Are you a member of any veterans organizations, and if so, which?
Not really. Mostly because of the reception I got.
In terms of coming home and that indifference level?
Well, you go to a veterans organization, you think these guys would do it, and they're telling you how glad they are their kids didn't go, and you went, and it really wasn't a war because you didn't do this, that, and the other thing, so it's just... It was kind of a come down because I was a true believer. I grew up on war movies and stuff like this, and you went into the Army or the Navy or whatever because that's what you did. And then I found out there were a whole lot of people who didn't see things that way, but they were very glad that you would take their position. So.
Gotcha. What have you done since separating from the military?
Oh, let's see. Went to SIU, completed a degree in, well, they called it Administration of Justice at the time. I think they call it something else now. Worked for part-time as a police officer in a Barney Fife situation. They kept telling me, well, we only got you at part-time, but we're going to bring you in as soon as we can. And that happened twice, and I moved on. Went back to school, got a degree in nursing, worked as a registered nurse for 17 years. Got to the point of 40 years old. What do I want to do with the rest of my life? Do I want to be 50 and doing this? Went back to school, came to Gislis, picked up the degree. Worked as a technical information specialist at the Army Corps of Engineers. That's what you call a librarian when you can't call them a librarian. Okay. And after that, I went into, well, I worked at United Samaritans part-time, and then a position opened up at Carl, and then I ended up at Carl for the last 17 years of my working life, and then just decided. My wife retired, and I told them within a year I would retire, and actually it was about 8 months later, I retired.
And how's retirement working for you?
Great. Worst day retired was better than the best day working.
There you go.
Didn't really hate my job. I enjoyed my job. I enjoyed the people. I just got tired of the BS. I participate now. I'm a master gardener at Champaign County, and in a couple of weeks I start the master naturalist training. And I've told both groups the same thing. I no longer wish to be in charge. If you need a hole dug, trash piped up, something like that, I will do that. But let the other people have what the ideas, let them run the place, because I no longer wish to do that.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
As a veteran, have you ever used your local library? Why or why not?
Every week, sometimes twice a week. As a matter of fact, when my daughter was born, she was 3 months old, and we took her in and got her a library card. The library staff at Champaign Public Library knew Katie by name by the time she was 10 years old.
So you were pretty popular there. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
What's the experience been like as a veteran going to the library?
Well, I think it's rather kind of neutral because nobody knows who you are. I mean, there are a couple people at the library that know of me.
Mm-hmm.
A couple librarians there I'm friends with. But it's not something that I talk about a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
Unless people ask me. And of course, you know, we've got some, there's some of us older veterans that are around here. Every now and then we'll meet up for coffee, as we call it. It's a meeting of the pontificating old farts. Just go on and on about everything that's wrong, and we'll tell you. Even if you don't even have to ask us, we'll tell you.
As a veteran, are there programs or types of books available at the library that you enjoy more than others?
Well, I'm still hooked on history. I've gotten really hooked on science fiction. And I suppose that historical mysteries, and there's a certain branch of, I mean, Arthur Conan Doyle is okay, but I like Lindsay Davis. Do you know her?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because if there's nothing else, the people she writes about tend to be somewhat real. As far as information for veterans, I know they have a lot of information for veterans at the library, and that's good to see. But some of those programs, I kind of tend to leave those for the people that need them, for the people who had trouble coming back, maybe didn't have the support or the breaks I did. So, I mean, I could go to the VA if I wanted to, but there are people I know that that's it for them, so I don't pull on their resources to take it away from them. Now, with everything that's going on, I may end up over there, but I would prefer, as long as I can do it myself, I will do it. I know, you know, do they still have the 5-point veterans preference and 10 points if you got wounded or something like that? They used to have that, and that's something that I never found much utility in, because it always seemed like you really had to know somebody.
Right.
So, water under the bridge.
As a veteran, is there something that you wish you could change about the library that would enhance your enjoyment of it?
No, not really. I mean, I'm pretty much a stick in the mud kind of person in that I will warm up to change slowly because I want to see how it's going to work. The tale I would use with people as far as technology goes, when I'm told that technology will solve everything, is that Technology always seems to fail at that moment that you really need it. And the example I use is, how many times have you broken a shoelace untying your shoes? Usually happens when you're trying to tie your shoes, when you really need to get going. That's when it breaks. So, it's not a great analogy, but it's the best one I could come up with, you know.
Okay. How did your military or wartime experiences affect your life?
Again, taking things as you look at it over the lifespan. I'm comfortable with who I am. If I had these experiences to do over again, I might change little things. But on the whole, where I am right now that's the way it is. I'll give you a hint how things change. When I was in Vietnam, and we were on guard mount,
What does that mean?
pulling guard duty, perimeter security.
Okay.
There was movement out on the, out past the wire. Didn't know what it was. So we got permission to do interdict fire, which is basically you either shoot at it or lob a mortar around or anything. All we had was a grenade launcher. It looked like a shotgun about this long, but a great big barrel fired a 40-millimeter grenade. So I stepped behind the berm because there would be a flash and you didn't want anybody to see the flash. And I got out there and I let go with that thing. Sure as shit, I blew up a water buffalo that had been out grazing. And this is a bit of a story, so you got to bear with me on this one. Well, the next day I'm in front of the CO because there's a farmer whose water buffalo I just eliminated. At 19, I was pissed off about having to pay for it. At 67, I removed that family's, a prime asset for that family, and I'm complaining about $150. I mean, these are subsistence people. And this asshole comes in and blows it up their cow? Let's think about this for a little bit. So, does that kind of answer the question?
Mm-hmm. Perspective.
Yeah. When one enters the autumn years of your life.
What are some life lessons you learned from military service?
I suppose number one is keep your stuff wired tight. You have to focus on what you're going to do. Stop worrying about what other people are doing. Think about what you're going to do. Choose your friends carefully. And when it all comes down to it, you have to be, if not at peace, at least comfortable with the decisions you made and what you did. I don't want to, do things and hear that little voice, Mrs. DeWitt, look what your son Gerald is doing. So, does that mean I don't make mistakes? Hell, I make mistakes all the time. But now it's almost like I'll think twice and say nothing. Is that too weird?
No, not
Okay.
at all.
Looking for confirmation or validation.
Every experience, I've done several of these interviews, and everybody views their experience and the things that they learn differently. One past interview was like, do your maintenance on everything, keep everything clean.
Well, that's my thing about keeping everything wired tight.
Mm-hmm.
Keep all your stuff ready to go.
Yeah.
As they say, men are filthy, weapons are clean.
So, what you get from your service is as individual as you are. I also did a interview recently where the person was not enlisted, drafted. And his view of his service is completely different from everybody who's enlisted. because he had to go. He didn't want to go.
You see, this is you bring up an interesting point when you talk about that, because was it Ford or Carter that gave amnesty to draft dodgers? I can't remember now. But the way I look at it is this way. When it initially happened, I was younger, so I was PO'd about it. But then I thought about it and said, I think the way we should make the decision is this. If somebody dodged the draft and left the country or something like that, people who went to prison for their beliefs, I have a lot of respect for. I think it was a dumb decision, but they got the cojones to walk the talk. But if you decided to dodge the draft, I think that the people who should decide whether you get back into the country should be the people who were drafted and went, or their survivors. If they say you can come back, I'm comfortable with that. Because I enlisted, I made my decision. As a matter of fact, I don't know if anybody's ever told you this, when I was in the Army, you used to be able to tell what everybody's status was by their serial number. For example, my serial number began with RA, that meant regular Army. US meant draftee. ER was enlisted reserve, and NG meant National Guard. Or as we used to say at that time, meant not going. Now, it's not true. I mean, they're over there in Iraq and Afghanistan, and God knows what other places we're at right now. So you had an identity right there. You know. Mind you, the treatment didn't seem to matter on your serial number. They made everybody's life miserable.
Well, especially I think in boot camp, that's the idea.
Oh, Jesus. We had a guy who was from Puerto Rico, and he decided to play like he didn't understand English and would just wander away. They got a Puerto Rican sergeant that was his personal mentor. That guy's life was hell after that. I'm surprised you didn't go over the hill, but there you are.
How has your military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
Well, I think we need a military. I'm a very strong supporter of veterans issues, as I tell people. That's sacred cow to me. And not that I need it, everything like that, but, do you know have you seen the motto of the VA?
Remind me.
For those who have borne the battle. Now, some people might go in and the toughest thing they may face would be a long line at the mess hall one day. But they put the uniform on, and everybody who does that know that you could be in a long mess hall and they say, guess what, guys? Everybody on the truck. We got to go because you're there. And I do believe in a strong military. I kind of wonder about some of the things they're doing, because when you have a military that is strictly all voluntary, it is no longer part of society. And I don't know if it's true, but from what I read the census, the people who are in the military are basically the folks that don't have a whole lot of other options. And they should have those options. At the same time, I think service is important. Did that kind of answer the question?
Mm-hmm. Oh, you did great.
Yeah. Well, I know I'm trying to remember what the entire question.
Mm-hmm.
So
the question was just, how has your military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
Well, as far as war, I think war sucks, but I understand that sometimes that's what you got to do. Because not to decide is, as they say, to decide. And I don't go for this stuff, well, you got to harden people and stuff like this. The people who come up with that kind of crap are either insane or have never been there. You know the expression, chicken hawk?
Yes.
Okay. We seem to have a lot of chicken hawks.
What message would you like to leave for future generations who will hear this interview?
Oh boy, I don't know. I guess it's about when you make decisions, if we're talking strictly about the service, or going into the military, something like that. The only one who can really answer that question for you is you. Understand there are going to be some times when you kind of wonder if this was a real good decision and stuff like that, but you have to accept the fact that some things you're going to do, they might not be the best things to do or the nicest things to do, but you will do them because it's the job. And I hope you don't have to go anyplace. I hope the roughest thing you face is a long chow line. You know, I mean, that's when you talk about these things, you know, people have asked me how I feel about the way how veterans are received, which even though I think it's kind of iffy, you know, they applaud them in the airport and stuff like this, and us, they'd sneak in the back gate. Treating those guys, let's say how I got treated, would not change the way I was treated, so why bother with that stuff? I'm glad there are people who are at least making lip service to respect their service. But, you know, having said that, I'm uncomfortable if somebody walks up to me and says, "Thank you for your service." No, it wasn't to get your gratitude, it was because it was what I felt was right. Particularly, it almost sounds mealy-mouthed sometimes. You hear it so often, it's just sort of like, does it mean anything? It's kind of like after 9/11, everybody's putting American flags on their cars, and then a month later you're finding the things run over in the highway. It's sort of like, you know, Jesus Christ, either do it or don't. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Is there anything you feel like we haven't discussed or should be added to this interview? And if so, what?
No, I think we've pretty much touched on a whole lot of things. I was more verbal than I thought I would be. Sorry.
No, it's okay. This is great.
Well, I don't know. Let me ask you two. Since I have been talking, is there anything that you heard me say that you would like to follow up on a little bit? I mean, I think your questions are pretty good. Yeah. But again, I haven't had a whole lot of time to think about it or review the questions. I might, you know, if you gave me a day or two, I might alter the answer a little bit. So what you got there, Jess?
Well, I know that there was something I had a question about, but now I can't remember. So let me read my notes. Maybe I'll think of it again.
The one thing I do think that's very good that's nowadays happening is, as part of the ammunition, they're using depleted uranium rounds now.
Mm-hmm.
They're at least getting on that quicker than they got on Agent Orange.
Yeah.
Because I remember the first time the Agent Orange story broke, I was with my brand new bride and my friend, and we were watching TV, and they're talking about this stuff. And I just kind of, so that's what they were spraying. You know, that explained why. Oh God, I think what we were Vietnamese is just horrendous. When you do Agent Orange and you kill the vegetation in an area like Vietnam, particularly South Vietnam, a lot of it is, you know, rainforest, jungle, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a whole lot of nutrients. Once you kill the vegetation, everything is gone, and you get something called laterite, which is basically soil that's been leached of everything. It's like concrete, because I've had to dig holes in it, and I know what it's like. And you don't dig a hole, you get out a pickaxe, and that's how you have to break it down. It's sort of like, there's a country that was actually having 3 rice harvests a year, and what have we done to that? You know, so with this depleted uranium, and the other thing is the PTSD and the traumatic head injuries. Hell, I got smacked on the head in Vietnam, and it was sort of like they sewed it up, gave me some aspirin, and back on duty. my friend Ann's son was near a mortar blast. I'm not exactly sure everything that happened, but 48 hours observation, and then they followed up and all this other kind of stuff. So thank God for that. I mean, it's not going to change anything that happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
At least they're taking care of the guys now.
Sure.
And I suppose that's the other thing too, is the fact that we have women in the military. I don't want the women to not have any opportunities that everybody else should have. But I would like to see recognition of what they give up when they go into the military.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that?
Pardon?
What do you mean by that?
They have all of the opportunities. But I think in the military it's even worse, where the people are saying things like, well, they just had to bring a chick in because they needed one, to make it look good.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's kind of like if you were African American, they say, well, they needed a black guy or a black woman to come in here. They're not judging you on what your actual talents are, though the people who work with you might.
Mm-hmm. So you just talked a little bit about napalm. I mean, is napalm and things that you were exposed to in Vietnam, are those things that you're worried about now as you're getting older? You're worried about that kind of exposure to chemical weapons and things like that?
Well, so far, non-composite material, nothing has showed up. It's there in the back of my mind, but I don't dwell on it that often. I just kind of, okay, well, if it happens, it happens.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. I do make sure that my healthcare providers know that, yes, I think I might have been exposed to this. So if you think you need to be doing something else, or you got something weird that I'm showing up with that doesn't jive with anything else you got, think about this.
Right.
Of course, then again, I've got a genetic history. I mean, McCain has glioblastoma.
Mm-hmm.
That's what took out my mother.
Right.
Yeah, so it's sort of like when he's there, and I know how this ends. So, now, interesting about McCain was, I don't know, guy put up with a lot. Would have voted for him too, until he chose Palin as his running mate, because I figured if anything happens to him, that lady is crazy. Of course, it would have been a prelude for now. Sorry, getting on politics. I don't know what your politics are. I should shut up.
Oh, it's totally okay.
Anything else?
Did you remember
Free
your
floating.
question?
I did think of my question, and it's a small one. When you were talking about the grenade you found,
Yeah.
you said that somebody told you not to be an idiot or something like that. What did they mean by that? I was
A
kind
little
of
voice
confused.
in my head
Oh, your voice in your head. Okay.
said, "Don't be a jackass. Don't be an idiot. Pick the thing up." But instead of picking it up like this, I grabbed
Before
it like
you
that.
knew.
Yeah.
Okay.
Before I knew.
Okay.
And like I said, I don't know. My grandmother had passed away, and I was fairly close with her, so I like to think that she just said, "Don't do that."
Mm-hmm.
But who knows? Yeah, it's just, that's the little things I was telling you about. You go right as opposed to left and stuff like that. You just never know.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Okay.
All right. Anything else?
No. I will let you know if I can get the other guys, if they're interested.
Okay.
As I was telling Jess, I think Mike would be a good guy. He was on nuclear submarines. And as we were talking one day, he says, "Well, you had it on the tough end. You were in Vietnam." And I said, he was on nuclear submarines the same time I was in, and the bit of, I guess, doggerel was, "What's long and black and don't come back," and it was submarines, because they lost 2 or 3 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Like they just disappeared. Sort of like, At least in Vietnam, I could dig a hole and try and hide if I needed to. But that,
Yeah, in a submarine, there ain't nowhere to go.
yeah, it's just, sure, you can dig a hole, you just gotta go down a couple miles.
Right.
But other than that, but I hope I help you guys out with this project.
Yeah, no, this has been great. This has been wonderful. So, just in terms of the project, we've had sort of a full range of different types of veterans who are in different types of services, so Army and Navy, Marines, all that kind of stuff, and from a wide range of conflict.